It's my pleasure to welcome everyone to our event today. We had a very successful conversation last night, and today we'll be continuing the conversation. My name is Manuel, and I am the Chief Operating Officer at the Institute for Global Engagement. On behalf of all of us at IGE and at our partner institute, the Prince Alawid bin Talal Center for Muslim and Christian Understanding here at Georgetown, I am happy to welcome you to today's event, which features a much-needed conversation between evangelicals and Muslims. I'd like to speak briefly about the mission of each institute, and then some of the themes that we're hoping to address today with some key questions. The Center for Muslim-Christian Understanding was founded in 1993 to build a stronger bridge of understanding between the Muslim world and the West, as well as between Islam and Christianity. The Center's mission is to improve relations between the Muslim world and the West, and to enhance understanding of Muslims in the West. Since its founding, the Center has become internationally recognized as a leader in the field of Muslim-Christian relations. The Institute for Global Engagement was founded in 2000. It promotes sustainable environments for religious freedom worldwide, encourages governments to protect religious freedom, and equips citizens to exercise that freedom responsibly. IGE sponsors innovative diplomatic initiatives and practical scholarship. It publishes a quarterly journal called the Review of Faith and International Affairs, which is singular in the field. And it offers academic programs to prepare current and future leaders for effective global engagement. The Institute is nonpartisan and does not endorse political issues or candidates. IGE launched this Global Leadership Forum 9 years ago, and this is the first year that we've partnered with Georgetown University. The forum that we refer to as GLF has always sought to help people of faith and of goodwill to grapple with international issues in a thoughtful and practical way. Clearly, with the newly elected president, who himself embodies the faith traditions of both Christianity and Islam, who just spoke last week in Cairo about the importance of mutual respect across lines of division, we know that this year's Global Leadership Forum could not have come at a more crucial hour. Arguably, every issue we face as a society is foremost an issue of how we choose to engage the other. And if engagement is defined by mere tolerance, it is likely that we will not be very successful. On the other hand, if our engagement is based on respect and reconciliation, then there is an opportunity that we will speak honestly, name our differences, identify common values, and build practical solutions. This is how we seek to define ontological or religious freedom: the right to choose, change, or share faith with others. As the faith children of Abraham, we have an obligation to respect the inherent dignity of the other and seek to be reconciled to the other. Now, all of this does not mean that people need to agree on everything. Today's GLF, and indeed the entire series of GLFs, seeks to tackle difficult and broad questions. What are the major conflicts between Christians and Muslims? And are these conflicts based on theological differences, cultural misunderstandings, separate worldviews, or political conflicts? Why has there been, especially in the United States, particular conflict between evangelicals and Muslims? Can these differences be bridged? And if so, what are some examples of cooperation? We look forward to a thoughtful and respectful dialogue throughout the day. Before I go any further, I simply like to take a moment to thank all of the people responsible for today's event. Thanks to the founding director of the Prince Alawid Center, Dr. John Esposito, to the president of the Institute for Global Engagement, Dr. Chris Seipel, to Georgetown's Alexa Poletto and Adam Holmes, to IGE's Abby Skeens, to all of our speakers, some of whom traveled a great distance to be with us, and certainly to all of you for taking time out to be with us today. Before we begin our program, I'd like to just ask you to do a few things. One is to remember to turn off any cell phones, pagers, beepers, or other devices that might make noise. I also would like to let everyone, Muslims here, know that we have a special spare prayer space for you in the basement area. It's restricted area, so should you like to avail yourself of that space, please see either Abigail, who's in the back, or Adam, who has a key and can open up the space. Where's Adam? Oh, there, right there. Without any further ado, I would like to introduce you now to the moderator of our first panel, Dr. John Esposito.
Thanks very much. Welcome to Georgetown. on behalf of both the president of the university, who couldn't be here because he's in Istanbul, and on behalf of our center. But I want to cut to the chase because we're starting a bit late and we have to finish on time. John Voll, who's our last speaker, has to leave at exactly 10:30 because he's speaking across the way to our annual Pastors and Imams Institute, a week-long institute that we have. And they would just be devastated if they missed 5 minutes of John's presentation. So what we're going to do is each speaker will speak for 10 minutes. Don't laugh, they're actually going to speak for 10 minutes. And what I want to do is really hold the speakers to the 10 minutes so that we have enough time for conversation. Let me emphasize that this is a setting which enables us to have an honest conversation. And on these kinds of topics, it's important to be honest. One of the most frustrating things that you have often is that when people get together and some don't see things the way others do, they come to a meeting like this, they really don't say what it is that they really have a problem with, and so it never really surfaces, and therefore I always wind up thinking all you got out of the meeting was half of what you could get. But we expect an honest conversation here. So why don't we begin with Jennifer Bryson from the Witherspoon Institute, and I'm going to not get into bios because you've got the bios right there.
Good morning. In looking at respect today, and especially in the realm between evangelicals and Muslims, I'd like to talk about what I see as one of the barriers to respect. And I can speak especially from my experience years within evangelical communities, and then move to ways that I think that we really can start to reduce this barrier, this hurdle. I find among evangelicals that when the issue of respect comes up, especially if it's phrased as respecting Islam, there immediately is a fear that this is going to mean having to agree. And when we look at evangelicals, a characteristic of evangelicals is that they take their beliefs very seriously. And we need to work with that and not against that. When they have this fear that respect is going to mean having to agree, quickly images are conjured up in the mind of, well, if I have to respect Islam, does that mean I have to respect and agree with and endorse the person who, in their interpretation of Islam, is throwing acid in the face of a schoolgirl who's trying to attend school in Afghanistan? However, if we can shift the discussion of respect out of abstract categories, such as respect Islam, and move it to an interpersonal level of respecting Muslims, this fear that quickly comes up in many evangelicals' minds can be dissipated. And here I'd like to tap into and borrow some research from a multidisciplinary project on respect that's going on at the University of Hamburg and the University of Rotterdam. And it's particularly social scientists. And they have found in studying different populations across cultures that there's often two very different meanings attached to respect, but repeatedly to the same word. One meaning is what they call appraisal respect. And that is respecting another person because that person holds a viewpoint that you endorse. For example, if I meet a person who has chosen to spend their Saturday morning preparing food at a soup kitchen, I could say, I respect that person. And behind that is an appraisal in my mind that volunteer work to help feed the hungry is a good thing. The researchers have found that many people also use the word respect in the sense of recognition respect. And this is respecting another simply because they are a human being. And when we speak of respecting Islam, this often would fall into the category of appraisal respect. When we can move the discussion among evangelicals to respecting Muslims, We can move it to recognition respect of, I can respect you as a Muslim because you are a creature of God. You are my neighbor. Unconditionally, you are worthy of respect as a creature of God. And when we can move discussion of respect to the interpersonal level, we also are freed of assumptions of monoliths. I went to McLean Bible Church for years, and professionally I'm in Arabic and Islamic studies, and I would meet people and we'd have these great discussions about what's happening in Islam in the world and my work, and then they would find out I go to McLean Bible Church. And they'd say, oh, well, those people, and go on with stereotypes. And I would ask them, well, how many people have you met who go to McLean Bible Church? How much time have you spent as a fly on the wall at a dinner party with people at McLean Bible Church who are having really honest internal disagreements and differences and are really trying to work through their faith lives together? And this is where, if we can look at respect as respecting human beings, respecting Muslims, respecting Christians, we can also recognize that within each faith community, there is not going to be a monolith. And this type of respect also encourages us to do more listening when we encounter the other. And I just want to close with touching on the relationship between respect and mercy. I think the world would be a better place if at every table of life we had a little mercy shaker, the way there's salt and pepper shakers at meal tables. And we could sometimes add some mercy where there is conflict. When there is tension over people feeling respect and not respected, I think within our own faith communities, we also need to encourage more mercy. And let me give you two very specific examples from my own life. When I was 16 years old, I was an exchange student in Austria in a rural community. I was from a nominally, vaguely Lutheran background. Personally, I was disinterested in God and anti-religion. But having grown up in American high school, difference was normal to me. I was used to being around Muslim kids and Jewish kids, and among the Christians I knew all sorts of varieties, and I knew non-religious kids. So being in a staunchly Catholic community was intriguing to me, but on Sunday mornings, my Austrian host family would leave me alone at home and go to church because they felt it would be disrespectful to ask me as a Lutheran to go to their Catholic church. And I understood that they meant well, and that's where some mercy comes in. I was disappointed. I was curious. I was wondering, well, where are these people going, and what is this thing they call Catholic? But I needed to understand that respect to them meant something a little bit different than it did to me. And then the second example, I was in Syria in April at a Women's Islamic Studies Academy on a great IGE trip. And I met these young women who were in their late teens and early 20s, and at each coffee break, I was with these same young women, and we had conversation after conversation, and towards the end, they pulled me aside and they talked to me and said, well, have you thought about converting to Islam? And they were so joyful. They had the most beautiful smiles. And for me, I perceived this as the highest respect they could have paid me. They cared enough about me as a person to share with me what was important to them. And I told them, you know, I am a Christian and this is a very important part of my life. And our friendship continues on now and is growing from that experience. But there are some who would have viewed that as disrespectful. And there again, we need to bring mercy into our discussions of respect and realize that people are going to express respect in different ways. So in final closing, I just want to focus on, I think that we can improve respect between evangelicals and Muslims by bringing it to a human level. And this is where pastors can play a particularly important role in helping their congregations understand that you can respect Muslims even if you don't yet understand or you're not yet comfortable with this grand, large realm of Islam.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Imam Mohammed Magid from the Gallup Center.
Good morning. I'm really grateful to Dr. John Esposito for inviting me to be part of this panel. In the issue of respect between Muslims and evangelicals, from the historical perspective, that Islam always have called the Christian and Jewish people of the book, Ahl al-Kitab. And the first person have given comfort to Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, in his journey of prophethood was a man by the name Waraq ibn Nawfal, who was a Christian man, who gave him the support, the moral, emotional support, and actually told him that he will have a difficult time with his fellow Arabs or Meccans in preaching and teaching the message of Islam. The second is the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, asking his companions to go to Abyssinia, where the king of Abyssinia, was named Najashi, have hosted them and give them what's called political asylum and refuge in his land. The third encounter of Muslims was Christianity and early Islam. The delegation came from Yemen, called Najran, come to visit the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and they have engaged with him in dialogue. And I would like to highlight this event here, because this Christian group came and engaged the Prophet in dialogue about their belief, and in the end of the discussion, they did not believe in Islam, but they have asked the Prophet to send a person from his follower to be the ambassador of the Prophet in the land. And he chosen a man by the name of Ubayd ibn al-Jarrah to represent him. We consider him the first ambassador to the Christian land. And during Khalifa named Umar, that Umar did not accept from his governor of Egypt that his son had mistreated a Christian man and abused him, and Umar brought the Christian man and the son of the governor of Egypt before him and established justice. Where he asked the gentleman that had been abused to have his right being given back to him by establishing the fair judiciary system that does not discriminate between Christians and Muslims. This is just general point of views of the historical background of the relationship with Muslim and Christian. Bring it to America. I do believe that American Muslims and evangelicals in America, they have a lot to work with, and I'm so glad we're holding this honest conversation here. Many Muslims have felt, for example, that the attack on the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, attack on the Quran, have represented all the evangelical group, because some of them have not been in McLean Bible Church, which is around the corner from me, by the way. They do a great job in social service and social justice. And therefore, there was a lot of mistrust and misunderstanding taking place here. Even I brought it up with the President Bush and other Muslim leader, a lady by name Sharif al-Khatib, Allah bless her soul. The first person opened the conversation with the president, said that your close friends been attacking Islam and Muslims and you've been saying nothing about it. And the president, a week after that, he distanced himself from this group, as well, Colin Powell. We have Muslims also have, they say awful things also about the Christian community as well. What we need to do is that to have honest, dialogue about what's go wrong, and when you see this kind of things come to surface. Number one, in order to have respect, to have understanding. That's why the word tolerance, by the way, is not the best word. Tolerance means like, I don't like you that much, but I'm going to put up with you. We need to elevate it to another level, to understanding. When we create understanding, then we create tolerance. And therefore, for example, at Gallup Center, we had a and with Fairfax Institute to have the course on Christianity taught by a pastor. Usually when someone teaches about Christianity in the mosque, taught by a Muslim. The first thing we can do is when another religion being taught, Christianity or Islam, in a church or in a mosque, has to be taught by a person who believes in that religion. This number one. Number two, what we did is that we created a common project between our youth to do certain things in environmental issues or feeding the homeless. And the Adams Center community is the community that responded to the burning of the 2 churches in Pakistan. I don't know if you know that. And the people who went to school in those 2 churches are Adams members, some of them are Adams members, who said we would like to hold a fundraising to rebuild those churches. And they did hold the fundraising, and they collected $50,000. And invited the pastor from Pakistan to come, and actually 2 of the ladies traveled back to Pakistan with him. When you say respect, I think it has to be based on 3 foundations. Number one, recognizing that God could have made all people the same. وما زالوا مختلفين, and the Quran says people will differ. This is one of the principles. Number 2, do not demonize and attack other person's religion. You might differ with them in theology. Quran says, وَلَا تَسُبُّوا الَّذِينَ يَدْعُونَ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ وَسُبُّوا اللَّهَ عَدْوًا بِغَيْرِ عِلْمٍ. Said, do not curse other people's religion and system of belief, so that might turn back and curse your own. Number 3, the dialogue has to be based on the what I call it the same level of the understanding and respect, not looking down to somebody in that dialogue. And the Quran says, نحن أو إياكم على هدى أو في ضلال مبين. He said, let's discuss it. Maybe one of us is wrong. He did not say that we are right and you are wrong, and vice versa. And therefore, when you establish a dialogue in the term of theology or religious understanding, has to be based on that on those principles. Also, I would like to say that the misconception and understanding about Islam and Muslims sometimes come from media, and unfortunately may have highly educated pastor in theology, but his information about Islam have taken it from, without naming any channel here, so it doesn't get in trouble. It has to be neutral, Georgetown University. I don't know whether I'm going to get myself in trouble. He or she, they have that perspective. I have a close friend, who's a pastor. He brought to me a book. He said this book was sent free to every church in Northern Virginia, talking about the danger of Islam. The danger of Islamism, they call it. And he said, I'm worried about how many people have read this book and believe what is said. The reason this pastor have come to me, because Adams Center, using that church at their Friday prayer branch in Reston. And actually Adams, by the way, the branches of Adams existed in churches and synagogues. In matter of fact, we have renting the same place in Ashburn as part of a synagogue. And therefore, because we have these years of understanding between us, he comes to me and says, what do you think about this book? And not only that, he said to me that I would like you to come to address. He gave me the book. I read the book, of course, and full of misunderstanding, misconception about Islam. And he said, I would like you to come to address and talk to my congregation about the book. Therefore, I came and I spoke about it. He's the same pastor, by the way, who taught Christianity to Muslim. And therefore, I think building trust and understanding between people first, and to the level that we can say, I find something troubling. Can you help me with this? I just read this book about you, or have come to know this information. Is it true or not? I think that the Dr. John Esposito suggested, and I agree with him, the honest, frank, open conversation. We can always hold hands. We think we are the world, and we are not. But we to have honest conversation about the issue that we differ on them. Some Muslims have misunderstanding of some verses in Quran that talks about using the word Christian and Jewish. And whenever they see the word Christian, they think that meant every Christian, and the word Jewish meant every Jewish. And one of the scholars says, ليس كل عموم القرآن عموم, which is saying in Arabic, not every specific word that says Christian meant every Christian, not every word says Jewish meant every Jewish. It's amazing that when the Muslims were in Abyssinia, in Ethiopia, and the king of Abyssinia was attacked, there was a war against his kingdom, Muslims fought with him because they adopted the land of him to become their land. Not only have received political asylum, but they identify themselves with him. What I would like to bring to your attention here, that if they have understood the Quran, that all Christians are bad and all of this, how Prophet Muhammad would suggest first to them to be with the Christian king, and number two, that to consider the people of that land is their people, although they may have different ethnic backgrounds. Those are Abyssinians and those are Arabs. And therefore, to conclude, and by the way, when he said that 10 minutes, he took a risk on that because I'm an imam, you know. But anyway, to conclude, I'd like to say that I think this is the beginning, and I'm so glad the center have held this conversation, and I would like to see it also being taken to the next level, where you involve youth and young people to be able to speak about the issue of their concern. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. I both appreciate your content, but also the time. It seems to me that for some of us, it would be good to have a similar conference with just pastors and imams so that we could, by way of example, point out to them that 10 minutes is really just fine to get a message across. But that's just my approach. Okay, our next... excuse me. Our next speaker is Dalia Mogahed of the Gallup Center for Muslim Studies.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum and good morning. I'd like to talk to you today from the point of view of our research on the issue of respect and on Muslim and Christian views of respect and of each other. Now, much of this research is not complete in that we didn't ask all of these questions everywhere in the world, but I will do my best to give you as much of a clear picture as possible with the information we have. The first thing I'd like to talk about is the importance of respect. Just as obvious as it may sound, when we ask people around the world, Muslims around the world, what can the West do to improve relations with the Muslim world? The most frequent response we hear all over the world from very diverse communities is to respect Muslims and Islam. It comes before more development, it comes before specific policy changes. Respect is central to the relationship from the point of view of Muslims, between Muslims and, quote, the West. When we ask people what can Muslims do to improve relations with the West, their most frequent response is to help control extremism, to show respect for Western positive thinking, as well as to project a more positive view of Islam. So there is recognition both of the need for Muslims to do a better job of controlling or helping to minimize the reasons that they feel Westerners have misunderstood them and their faith, and an emphasis on the need for them to also respect Western positive thinking. So if respect is such a central idea, at least from the point of view of Muslims around the world, how does this play out here in the United States? What does that respect look like? Another question we asked around the world was this, just simply, do you believe the Western world respects the Muslim world? And do you believe the Muslim world respects the Western world? In response to the first one, do you believe the Western world respects the Muslim world? The vast majority of Muslims said no. So, for example, 89% of Palestinians said no. 87% of Egyptians said no. What was most surprising, however, to us was that 54% of Americans, the general public that is, also said no, that they don't think the Western world respects the Muslim world. So there's actually some common ground there in that Americans and Muslims around the world, in majorities, in varying degrees, don't believe the Western world respects the Muslim world. And it's interesting to talk about what do they mean by respect. On the other hand, do you believe the Muslim world respects the Western world? The majority of Muslims said that they think the Muslim world respects the Western world. But the majority of Americans didn't believe that Muslims respected the Western world. So there is a gap in perception. Muslims believe the Muslim world respects the West. Americans don't feel respected. Now, if we just dive into the idea of American views of Muslims and Muslim views of Christians. So it's not completely even, but let's just take it from here. Palestinians, we'll go back to them because they're a very interesting group in that they are among the most unfavorable in their opinion of the United States as a country, especially our leadership. 89% still say they disapprove of US leadership. However, the majority of Palestinians say they have favorable opinions of Christians. And they're actually the group with the largest percentage of people who say that they have favorable opinions of Christians, a majority. So there is a distinction being made between the United States as a country and Christianity or Christians as a religious group. I think that's a very important point to make. With the exception of Pakistan and Turkey, in every Muslim country we looked at, more people have favorable views of Christians than negative views, sometimes as high as 10-to-1, favorable to unfavorable. And that includes when we ask about specifically fundamentalist Christians. Even when we use the word fundamentalist Christians, it's a very favorable view. In fact, Muslims in London, Paris, and Berlin have a more favorable view of, quote, fundamentalist Christians than do the American public, which I think is very interesting. So the idea of someone following their faith strongly is something that Muslims, in fact, admire, even if it is fundamentalist Christians. Now, if we look at the American public and their views of Muslims, Muslims are among the most negatively viewed religious group in the United States. In 2008, they were at a negative 17, meaning that the percent of people who had positive views minus negative views was negative 17. Now, this compares to plus 38% among Palestinians of positive minus negative views, with the rest being neutral. So when it comes to the American views of Muslims, it is more negative than positive. Interestingly, when we ask Americans about Muslim countries, it is actually either neutral or positive. The majority are neutral or positive. So the counterintuitive issues is that Muslims around the world, when they view the United States as a country, it's very negative. Christians as a religious group, it's overall positive. The American people, when they view, quote, Muslim countries, it's either neutral or positive in a slight majority, but Muslims, it actually gets worse. But Americans reserve their most negative opinions for Islam as a faith. And this correlates very strongly with the frequency by which they go to church. So, people who say they go to church at least once a week, among this group, 67% of them have unfavorable views of Islam as a faith. If they go to church only once a week, it goes down to 35% unfavorable. Once a month, 24%, and only on major religious holidays, 15%. So there's a strong, very strong correlation between frequency of church attendance and unfavorable opinions of Islam. Now, some might say that this is because religious people go to church often, and that is very highly correlated with being an evangelical in our data. That is, I'm talking purely from the empirical evidence. Don't agree with Islam, obviously. They are faithful to their own religion. However, whereas this group that goes to church at least once a week, who are, like I said, mostly evangelicals, 67% of them have unfavorable views of Islam, 18% only have unfavorable views of Judaism. So it's not just that Islam is not Christianity, but there is something about Islam that people who attend church often have a special discomfort with. Now, the issue of is it okay to simply have a very unfavorable view of Islam, because we can separate that from how people feel about Muslims as people. And I think the point that was made is a very interesting one and an important one to endure or to explore. The issue is this, though. We ask people in the United States to express their opinion of their own level of prejudice against different religious groups. We found that approximately 15% of Americans in 2009 said that they had a great deal of prejudice against Muslims. When we look at this group, the strongest predictor of falling into this group of extreme prejudice, all else being equal, is an unfavorable opinion of Islam as a faith. So it's very hard to make the argument that you can both hate or be very, very negative in one's opinion of the faith of Islam, and that does not connect or does not relate to how one feels about Muslims as people. The other issue, though, is respecting Muslims as people only, while not while believing things about Islam that are very, very negative, which many of them may not be, of course, shared in terms of Muslims' own understanding of their faith, is that it can become very unsustainable. And here's the reason why. What Americans admire most about themselves is their democracy and their technology. What Muslims admire most about the West is technology and democracy. When you admire what people admire about themselves, that can lead to that person feeling respected. What Muslims admire most about themselves, what they in fact see as their greatest asset and their society's greatest asset, is Islam as a faith. So it is very hard for it to be reconciled that one can respect a person for being a human being, but then demonize what they themselves see as their greatest jewel. And I think this is a very important concept to talk about. Is it really possible for people to feel respected? Now, we might think we are respecting them as people, but is it possible for them, will they feel that respect if at the same time we hold incredibly negative views of what they hold most dear? I think that's an important concept to discuss. Now, does respect mean agreement? I think the answer is no. I don't think that Muslims, by saying they have favorable opinions of Christians, that they mean they agree with Christians. But respect does mean recognition of a certain value placed on something. And I think there is an importance in not only, at least from the point of view of people feeling respected, of not only respecting people as human beings because they are creatures of God, but also recognizing and attempting to understand what it is that they see as most important to them. So in closing, the data suggests that Muslims around the world, while having very unfavorable opinions of the United States as a country, especially when asked about leadership, although that is starting to change with Obama, they have relatively positive opinions of Christians as a religious group. In contrast, the Americans as a public, especially very religious Americans, have relatively positive opinions of Muslim countries, relatively positive or less positive, but not too bad opinions of Muslims as people, but have the most negative opinion of Islam as a faith, and that this will inevitably get in the way of Muslims feeling respected as people. Thank you.
And finally, John Voll, Associate Director of our center.
It's a pleasure to be here with you. And what I want to do is to maybe take a slightly different take on the issue of respect, especially picking up on what Dalia was closing with. Most of the time in our discussions, when we talk about respect for each other, part of the task is to look for common grounds. But the issue of respect really isn't an issue that is important if you have people who share a whole bunch of things. That you're not, if you have the same moral values as person X, and if you eat at the same restaurants, and if you have the same lifestyle, respect is no problem. Respect becomes an important dimension of interpersonal and intergroup relationships because of differences. And one way of coping with differences is to say, we've got to, as the center slogan says, build bridges. And so we look for commonalities. We do what is the recognition, respect, and so on. And so one way of coping with difference is saying it's not as important as what we share. But quite frankly, the bottom line of respect is, if we start with the assumption that I just started with, that it isn't difficult to respect somebody who's just like you. And so then it's easier to respect somebody that you can pretend is like you. But what if somebody is still different? You've built bridges, you've done all of these different things, and you discover at the end of the process that these people are different. And so then you get this question of where Dalia was closing, of can you respect what other people respect that may be different from what you respect? Having a negative view of what other people hold dear is probably the most disrespectful approach to difference. So let me just talk quickly about how do we do respect, not within the context of saying, let's we're all anonymous Christians, or we're all potential Muslims, or we're all this or this, but rather it's quite frankly say, we're never going to get over the fact that we're different. In good evangelical terms, hallelujah. And in good Islamic terms, Allahu Akbar. We are different. Let's live with it and recognize it. Now, let me just sort of give a little bit of a framework then. How do we cope with difference? Very usually, historically, we cope with difference by seeing the different person as being in some way a lesser being from what we are. And if that difference is really great, we fight it and we try and overcome it. But historically, in the modern era, we then moved into a second kind of alternative that when I was a kid was a really good word. But as we've heard at least twice this morning, is now no longer a good word. And that is toleration. I mean, often my Midwestern Protestant upbringing, it was a great virtue to be tolerant of those Catholics down the street. Toleration was a virtue, but Paul, for example, talked about mere tolerance is not really what we're looking for. And the Imam commented that we've got to get beyond tolerance. And so tolerance is one way of coping with difference, but tolerance is not respect. Tolerance is essentially saying you're different and you're a lesser person than I am, but I can put up with that. Now, the next step in this sort of moving toward respect, the next step, or the next mode, is something that says there may be something good about diversity. There may be something good about difference. Let's accept the idea that we're all different. And then we can build structures around it. And so we move from tolerance to pluralism. And in pluralism, we go beyond the tolerance that says you're different and I can put up with that, to you're different and I'll accept that. But you're still different, and your difference makes you different from me. You know, that this is not something, so you're still not necessarily getting away from a negative view of what the different person holds as dear. And so I would suggest that respect goes beyond combative difference and goes beyond toleration and goes beyond even pluralism to a different kind of affirmation, which says that there is difference, there is diversity, and that's good. That's good. That's necessary for human survival. It's an important mode of human survival. As you look at biological developments of crops, corn and wheat and so on, the more you homogenize an important food crop, the more open that important food crop is to being totally wiped out by one particular virus. You have famines built on increasing uniformity of production. Diversity is important. Now, as we look then at how do we say that diversity is good, I think one of the really critical dimensions of respect within the context of diversity being good is that we do, in fact, have to, using Dalia's words, admire what people admire in themselves. And one of the things that we get with toleration and with pluralism is recognition of difference, but also the assumption that I'm right. And we need, as a part of respect, to recognize the virtue of something that is different. And here I think a word that I like is to think in terms of credibility and incredibility. I may not believe what you believe, but if I'm going to respect you, I have to, as a part of my belief, believe that what you believe is credible. I can't say, yes, you have a right to believe anything you want to, however stupid it might be. To show respect, I have to be able to say, I don't believe what you believe, but it's credible. And there are a couple of issues, just as I'd like to just sort of wrap up, there are a couple of issues in Muslim-Christian dialogue that I think we all avoid because we know that the other person really thinks that whatever it is that is the admirable internal thing is seen as incredible by the other side. I have very good Christian friends who are relatively sort of old-fashioned liberal Protestants who never think about the Trinity. But get them into a discussion with Muslims, and by God, the Trinity is right there. And I have Unitarian friends who think of themselves as Christian, but they never talk about incarnation. But you put them in front of a Muslim, you put them in front of an imam, and incarnation is right up there. Now, Trinity and incarnation are core parts of the conceptual faith vocabulary of Christians. And it is important for people engaged in dialogue who may not believe in incarnation and Trinity to accept the fact that that is credible for intelligent people. And similarly, flip side, as one is looking at Muslim conversations, Christians say, geez, we got through biblical criticism. Why can't you guys look at the Quran in the same way that we look at the Bible? Or we already have enough prophets. Why should we believe that somebody else is a prophet? And the centrality to Islam of the belief that the Quran is the direct word of God, and that direct word of God was transmitted by a prophet in the tradition of prophets, that has to be credible in the mind of the non-Muslim who is engaging in conversation with the Muslim. It doesn't do any good to say, it doesn't do any good to historicize the Quran and say, well, sure, you can believe that the Quran is the word of God, but we know differently somehow. And so I think that respect means this idea that I may not believe what you believe, but I will accept what you believe as credible. And this fits really then into a theology of respect that says diversity is God-given. The Imam quoted one of the ayahs. If God would have wanted to, he could have made us all alike. But God did not make us all alike. And so our diversity is God-given. The Apostle Paul, looking at the community that was developing in the Eastern Mediterranean, saw people complaining because you had some people who were Apollos and some people who were this. And he said, look, we are a body. We're a body, and everybody in the body can't be a hand. Everybody in the body can't be an eye. And I think that if we expand that now to essentially the recognition, respect of human beings, not everybody needs to be a Muslim, not everybody needs to be a Christian, not everybody needs to be a Hindu for us to have a respectful sense of the virtue of diversity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. Well, why don't we have a good chunk of time for discussion. We have about 20 minutes. So, yes. And could you identify yourself when you come up, because then we'll know whether or not we're going to send a hitman after you. Thank you.
No problem. My name is Charles Stromer. I'm a visiting fellow with the Center for Public Justice. I guess my question is for Imam Magid. Some scholars and academics tell us that Islam is a religion of peace. Some tell us that Islam is a religion of violence. The former base their assumption on the earliest decade of the Prophet, and the latter based their assumption on, well, he went to Medina, and when he came back, things went haywire. Which is it? And which history should we look to, or is there some other way other than this binary way to look at it? It seems confusing to me.
The life of the Prophet is the interpretation of the Quran. The Prophet lived the Quran. Number one, I would like to say as a premise of the addressing the issue of contradiction of the text to the history. The Prophet himself lived the Quran. Muslims, through the history, have made mistakes, as Christian as well. I'm quite sure you're aware of that. And the Islam as a religion from day one does not look to confront people. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, in all the physical fight that he went to, he seeked peace first. And he was always under attack. He was responding to it. The verse in the Quran that says, whoever take one innocent life as if take a life of all humanity, and whoever save one life save all other humanity, it's also in the Old Testament. Actually, I was interviewed after 9/11 by a journalist who asked me what Islam says about taking an innocent life. And I quoted this verse. The guy says, I interviewed a rabbi before you who quoted the same verse, and I interviewed the pastor who quoted the same verse. I said, God is consistent. You know, it is in the verse actually is in the Torah, Old Testament. And therefore, you know what happened in Spain when Muslims lived with Jews and Christians in an environment of tolerance and understanding. When the Jews were asked after the war in Europe where they would like to go, they chose Muslim countries. And therefore, Islam have really taught and promote tolerance. That doesn't mean that Muslims have not committed violence and violated other people in their history. But Islam itself does not teach and promote that.
As chair and somebody who didn't get a chance to talk because I'm chair, I'm just going to cut in here. I don't think that the way the question was framed is actually accurate in terms of where some scholars come down. That is, I mean, you are right. People talk about the difference between the Meccan and the Medinan, verses, and they tend to say, well, the Meccan are, quote, more religious, the Meccan are, more, quote, problematic, depending on who's reading them. But in fact, I think that the whole text has to be seen, all the scripture of the Quran has to be seen within the context, because we Christians do the same thing. That is, for example, my Christian friends will always compare talk about the New Testament and Jesus in the New Testament, but they don't talk about the passages in the Old Testament that deal with warfare, et cetera. And even there, one has to contextualize those. And I think that that's where it really makes a difference. When you contextualize the passage, so that, for example, in the Medinan passages, when you have something like slay the unbelievers wherever you find them, et cetera, if you contextualize the passage, then you're able to say this was in response to a certain thing that happened at that time, A, and B, you're able to avoid what most commentators who take, quote, the negative approach say, which is, well, they're talking about slaying the unbelievers, that means Christians and Jews, which isn't the case. They were referring to the pagan Meccans who they were fighting and were coming against them. And I think that's one of the problems we have. And I would just end with this comment. Christians, many Christians, from my point of view, Muslims have their way of slanting things at times and being too romantic about certain situations. Christians have a way of narrowing their context. So we don't deal and say, but the God of the Old Testament is ours, and look at this, I mean, boy, we're talking about a fair amount of bloodshed, and we forget about what happens in history, i.e. the church fathers. Paul and I were talking last night about the difference between Benedict and Bernard of Clairvaux and others. I mean, I can admire Bernard of Clairvaux and many church fathers, but when it comes to issues of religious pluralism, my Protestant friends, and I had to reach out to accept that with John Voll, who's now my closest friend, which is definitely an act of God that as a child I would be so close to a wasp. But in any case, we just believe you spray them like everything else. But the reality of it is that, when I grew up, the way in which we framed Protestants and the way in which we looked at the religious wars, it was like black and white. On the other hand, when I taught at Holy Cross, I had a colleague, University of Chicago graduate, Methodist from the Midwest, who had me come into his American religion course, and it was like he was listening to a foreigner. He was just amazed when I talked about my experience growing up Catholic. So it's not only Catholic to Muslim, it's even the way in which we contextualize within our tradition.
I was wondering if anyone would give an explanation on the disrespect that was even mentioned as far as Americans towards fundamentalism. And I'm just thinking about like one considered fundamental of the faith, that Jesus was born of a virgin. Many professing Christians, members of my church, they don't necessarily believe in the virgin birth of Jesus Christ. And I'm curious, what role do you see respect playing in, and then even to the mention of credibility, when much of the rest of the world sees this as not credible? I'm curious, Muslim and Christian perspective on that.
Can I do? Just a quick thing on that. This is one of the interesting issues. Virgin birth is one of those very interesting issues where the division is not between Muslim and Christian. That the Quran also speaks of Mary and does not, and speaks of Mary in terms that would be very familiar to a fundamentalist interpretation of the virgin birth. And I think that it becomes, for respect, it becomes very important then to recognize also the diversity, that some of the real differences are not Muslim versus Christian, but they are particular interpretive modes within Muslim community and particular interpretive modes within Christian communities. Some of the best allies of, quote, liberal or fundamentalist Muslims and Christians are across the religious boundary, and I think that becomes an important part of also increasing and encouraging respectful relationships. I think of, for example, of the dear saint that Imam mentioned is Sharifa. I worked on committees with this absolutely delightful woman whose vision of religious community in the DC area was a great vision. And she and I were more often than not on the same side in disputes with rather different interpretations from Christians and Muslims.
I think that we have to recognize that someone might not believe in what we believe, and still we can respect them. If somebody will come to me, for example, let's talk about the person who's not Christian, who's not Muslim, who is an atheist, doesn't believe in God. I don't believe to believe in God does not exist is credible. I don't believe in that. I believe God exists. But I do believe in the point of view of another person. I can see what they're coming from and can engage them. By the end of the day, no compulsion religion. The minute that a person uses their theology to impose their belief on other people, and this dimension of believing in life to come, I want to save the people, the concept of hellfire and who are going to go to hell, who are going to go to heaven, is sometimes play a role on how people view religion. I was asked one time in the discussions, what do you think about who's going to go to heaven and who's going to go to hell? I said, this is out of my jurisdiction. This is God's jurisdiction. I cannot speak on the behalf of God. But it's very important for us that having different view of belief should not make us oppress or commit aggression or to try to eliminate or take people's rights. But I don't have to believe and to accept your belief system to respect you.
Yeah.
Good morning. My name is Randall Damari. I am an affiliated minister here at Georgetown University, particularly representing an evangelical denomination. And my question is actually directed to our Muslim panelist. I'd like to ask, first of all, if you come from a tradition within Islam a body that actively practices outreach and proselytization? And if so, how do you reconcile your value of the message of Islam and the idea of respecting the Christian message, which ultimately, if you're sharing the message of Islam, there's a real conflict within that, which I think really, to me, comes to the very core of what we're talking about today as an evangelical personally.
In my mosque after Friday, a group of Christian people stood in our parking lot, distributing Bible in Arabic and in English, and said they want to save the Muslims in the parking lot of Adams, in my mosque. And therefore, Christians have same passion. They believe that they want to save the others. But it's very important that sharing your faith. I do believe religion is like a market ideas. You put your ideas out there. If somebody wants to be Christian, want to become Jewish, they want to become Mormon, whatever the belief you want to choose is fine. You have to give me ability to express myself. If somebody chooses to believe what I believe, it's fine. The minute I impose my belief on somebody, that's why I'm crossing the line. Therefore, respect doesn't mean that I can tell you, I try to convince you, like she just said eloquently, that they pull her aside, they want her to become a Muslim. But she didn't feel disrespected. She said, thank you, I'm going to keep my own. Those people of the Najran from Yemen, they came to the Prophet, they debated the Prophet himself. I said to the Muslim, who can be more eloquent than the Prophet explaining Islam? The end of the day, I said, thank you. We're going to remain Christians. But to show respect for you, we want an ambassador from you to come with us. That's what I think we shouldn't think about. We should look at it in that perspective, and maybe Dalia will say something.
Well, I did want to clarify that I'm not from a religious organization. I'm from the Gallup poll, and we study Muslim opinion around the world. But of course, I am, as an individual, a Muslim. So just wanted to make that clear. I think the question was, how can I think what you're asking is, how can people respect each other if they're essentially have competing objectives? So one group is trying to spread the message of Islam while the other is trying to spread the message of Christianity, and they're actually competing for the same group. Or they're two, they have two products that are different, that are competing, that are in the same space. I'd go back to what the Imam said yesterday, actually, which I found very insightful, which is this idea of respectful competition. And I thought that was really important, because he explained that respect and even the idea of cooperation and coexistence does not mean compromise. It doesn't mean compromising what one believes or the traditions of one's faith, which in both evangelical Christianity as well as Islam does include teaching and inviting people to one's faith. So this idea of respectful competition, which the best corporations actually do very well, and they do have positive opinions of the other in a competitive way, but in still a respectful way. And I think that is possible.
I've worked both with Muslim and Christian groups on how to reach out to the others. I like the phrase reach out, they clearly mean proselytize. But now everybody in business uses that. The Gallup people in particular love to say that they reached out to somebody but in our society. But one of the things that I often say to them is there's a difference between inviting someone and slapping them across the face to get their attention. And give the message, and I think that's that's a sine qua non in terms of a starting point. Yeah.
Assalamu alaikum. Hello. My name is Khizer Hussain. I'm with the American Muslim Health Professionals. I wanted to enlist the panel's help to delve a little deeper into what Dalia brought up about this inverse correlation between the increased church attendance and the decrease in apparent lack of Muslims. I guess what I want to get at is is there something that's being taught in sermons in churches across the nation that is contributing to this sort of effect? When I was growing up, my best friend he's now an evangelical pastor, and I'd go to his Pentecostal church on a monthly basis. And at that time, the false religion was the Soviet bloc, was communism. It seems as though now the false religion is Islam when I listen to Christian radio and Christian media products. So just wanted your analysis on that.
Just to clarify really quickly, the correlation, which of course, as we always say, doesn't mean cause, but the correlation is between church attendance, which does in fact link very strongly to being a self-reported evangelical. So the people who are going to church at least once a week are mostly evangelicals. But there is a correlation between church attendance and unfavorable opinion of Islam as a faith. 67% of those who go to church at least once a week have unfavorable opinion. If you only go to church once a week, it goes right down to 35% unfavorable opinion of Islam as a faith. And that does compare the people who go to church at least once a week, while 67% of them have unfavorable opinion of Islam, only 18% have unfavorable opinion of Judaism. So that's the data that was shared.
In my experience, and this is just anecdotal on my own experience, years at McLean Bible Church, part of the problem had absolutely nothing to do with malicious attitudes or things that people heard in sermons. It was a problem of social isolation, that the evangelicals I knew at McLean Bible Church were deeply committed in their faith, and this meant that Sunday, most of them were at McLean Bible Church for at least 3 to 4 hours. There's Sunday school classes, and then there's church worship service, and then getting together with people to plan the next activity. Then one night of the week is your small group, these home Bible study groups. About 3,000 to 5,000 people at McLean Bible Church are in these. And then one night of the week, you're at singles ministry or family ministry. And then on Saturday afternoon, you're, preparing the folders for your volunteer project that you're doing at McLean Bible Church on Sunday. And it's a very unintentional social isolation, but the higher the level of commitment in faith communities, the more likely people are to spend time inside of those faith communities. And one of the ways McLean Bible Church was trying to free people out of this was they created a part of the church that is entirely focused outside of the church building. And yes, this was to bring Jesus Christ to the city of Washington, D.C. This is an evangelical church. But within that, for example, I founded a ministry called Creation Stewards. And for 2 years, we went out into the community in Virginia State Park System with the Nature Conservancy, with the Park Authority of Northern Virginia, and we did volunteer work to care for God's creation. And in that, I would invite my Muslim friends to come along. And we had a great time together, and terrific new relationships were built, and we learned from each other while we were out there removing invasive species that are destroying bird habitats. So I think that if more and more can be done to provide to realize that evangelicals are very likely to want to spend time in faith-related activities, but find faith-related activities that also include a broader social outreach. It may sound kind of simple and benign, but in my experience, that was where the bridges began to be built and the stereotypes began to be broken down. That the disrespect wasn't coming from malicious attitudes, although those are there, and we need to work on those in certain communities. It had much more to do with social isolation.
If I could I just want to share one piece of information. I think that's a very important point. One thing that we did find, though, is that people who attended church at least once a week were as likely as everyone else to say they knew a Muslim. Now, what does that mean? How do you know a Muslim? Does that mean you watch someone on TV? Well, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, But they did say, the question was, do you personally happen to know a member of each of the following religious groups? And 52% of those who attended church at least once a week did say that they did know a Muslim. And that was the same as the other groups. So there wasn't a difference in that. And interestingly, that group as well, and this is important to mention, were the frequent churchgoers, were the least likely to say, the most likely to say they had no prejudice against Muslims. They were more likely to say that than people who attended church less often and who had more favorable opinions of Islam, even though that seems to contradict the idea of it being such a predictor. But they were the most likely to have negative views of Muslims on specific issues. So no, we have no prejudice, but no, Muslims don't want peace. No, Muslims don't think women and men should have equal rights. No, Muslims do not believe in racial equality. So on every single specific question, they had more negative views, but didn't feel like they had any prejudice, or were more likely to not admit that or more likely to say they had no prejudice. So I do think we have to push a little harder. It might social isolation, I'm sure, could be a contributing factor. It's not supported in the data, at least with that one question of, do you know a Muslim? And I think we have to push harder into the content of church sermons. I'm just not willing to say that has nothing to do with it, because of my anecdotal experience with media. Christian media, whether it's television or radio, is acutely anti-Islam. Now there is a carefulness to not say Muslims are bad, and in fact, the verbiage I often hear is Muslims are the first victims of Islam. But what is said about Islam as a faith is extremely negative. And much of it is a misconception. And much of it is just simply not what Muslims even believe about their own faith. It is extremely negative. The content of this media is very, very negative. If anyone wants to argue with that, it's fine. I would love to discuss it. But there's no way to avoid that being a reality. And it's borne out very clearly in the data that attendance is causing a very big difference in people in terms of their views of Islam as a faith.
Yes.
In the name of the one who loves us all. My name is Andra Bayless, and I represent the DC Interfaith Peace Initiative. And I really wanted to speak to the very fact of what you're saying, Dalia, and also to springboard from what John had said in terms of reaching out, maybe another way of saying proselytizing. And the news that we receive either by the newspaper or the television or the radio is maybe another way of saying propagating prejudice. And the reason why my group originated is because of what the media did to a Muslim woman who shared a very pitiful story in a Quaker meeting for peace a few years back, where she had gone into her child's school, given a beautiful presentation on Lebanon and her religion, Islam, only to come home and turn on the television and see Oklahoma bombing had taken place, and they blamed it on the Muslim community. And right there, she made a promise to her husband that she would never raise her children within the religion of Islam. And of course, she cried when she shared that story. And there were 7 of us who said no one who lives in this part of the world, or really any part of the world, should ever be afraid to raise their children in their respective religion. So the question to you, from what we're really hearing today, is all of the people present today and who are attending, this lovely gentleman leaving to go talk to the clergy, we already have hearts that are inclined this way. I mean, when we clap, we agree with you. But work needs to be done with the media. The question to you would be, are there any initiatives to be able to address the media, to have workshops and invite the difficult media to be able to have panel discussions, such as you're having, a whole weekend of a conference to invite all those people, even reading who writes the most difficult and blasphemous articles about different religions. Invite them. Let them break bread together with you and give a workshop. What's being done in that regard for that type of initiative?
I can address that in terms of saying that the media is a problem, and Dalia knows there are studies on this also in terms of media coverage, but and workshops do take place, but part of the problem that you have is actually at the heart of what drives the media, and that has to do with profits, competition for market, and we had a panel right here, in fact, with a number of members of the media, Sally Quinn, Washington Post, John Meacham, who's the editor-in-chief of Newsweek, and that issue was raised about media coverage, and John answered it very directly and I think very, very truthfully. He basically said, look, the reality of the media is that what captures attention, what captures people's attention, we look for conflict discourse and also the explosive events. I mean, and we know that. You can put aside religion. Just think about just media. I'm raised in New York, and when my mother came to visit us in Boston, she put TV on the first time in the morning. She said, "How can you live here?" Because she puts on the morning news. The first thing you get are all the people getting killed. Then we moved to Washington, the same routine. Now my mother can contextualize what was going on, in New York. So I think the very nature of the media, in terms of that drives, I think one can continue to do more. We can continue to reach out to the media, but I think the reality of it is it's part of its, if you will, its capitalist DNA right now, and they're even more, as you know, under siege in terms of the survival, certainly of the print media. So cracking the media thing is difficult.
I have a twofold question about respect and privacy and mercy. The two levels are home and church. Now, in my world at home, there's a need to protect privacy. The priest is the parent, and, they exhort the commandments that are taught by Jesus Christ as the eternal priest and the tribe of Judah and Abraham, who is a Hebrew. But once we go outside of the home, be it the church or we're still in home and we choose to invite someone in that's not a Christian or Judeo-Christian, then it's mercy, because you come inside of our privacy at your own risk. But what we believe is that Jesus has authority over all in God's kingdom. And the mightier weight of the issue of mercy is the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven.
It's going to be a question here, right?
Right.
Yeah,
okay, but what I'm saying here is that, facts aren't demonstrated, just by, dialogue. It has to be, deeds or actions. And so that's what I'm saying. When you're talking about deeds or actions, you might say miraculous healing. But also you have to realize that based on your behavior, it's Jesus that saves you from, the negative views. And that when you're going to church, you're exhorted by that. No one can bear the burden of media or dialogues.
We need a question because we're out of time.
The question is that what I said earlier, how is respect going to interplay with privacy and mercy? I didn't get that from the panel today.
Anybody?
It's privacy. The right to choose facts, not religion.
I don't know if you understood the question well, but I do believe that when you have your belief dear to you, and you feel that sometimes somebody violated your belief by insulting or bringing a different point of view, I think what we need to do to engage people and to be open, understanding, to others. I think the sister was coming from the point of fear, that how have a person to come to speak to you in your home that violate privacy. If I may say, we have people who knock your door, says, Jesus send us to you, and they come to your home. And I think that the minute you open your door for them to sit in the couch, then you can have you have chosen for them to come to your privacy. They have not imposed themselves on you. And we have visitors like that to my home. I think we can have mutual respect and discussions about what we believe in, and you don't have to submit to their people's belief, even if they come to your home.
We had two people who wanted to ask questions. Could I suggest that we take both questions at the same time, and then we can wrap up? So,
my question was basically one word that was not used through this meeting, and that is love. The root of this whole situation, we're speaking of a branch of a problem, which is respect. Within any religion on the face of this earth, there is that basic root that says love. And at that root is a weed that's called hate. And it attacks. And then all these branches spring up. And we try to work with the branch instead of going straight to the root. I know in my heart that each one of you here on the panel today was trying to express this word in some way. But sometimes it seems a difficult word to use because it's so simple. It's so childlike. So my question is, why did you not?
and I'll take the second question.
Point well taken. I think that yes, I think the issue of love is very crucial in the building understanding. There's a passage in Matthew which is similar to the teaching of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, where God says, "I was hungry, you fed me not. I was naked, you clothed me not." The same thing the Prophet Muhammad said, and said that if you have fed the hungry people, you find me there. If you have clothed someone, you find me there. I think one of the things that Christians and Muslims can do is to love humanity and to work together to eradicate malaria around the world, clothe the naked people, educate, fighting illiteracy. I think that's the common ground that we can have. Thank you.
Would you like to say anything?
I think it's a great question for us to close on, because love ultimately has to be a core element in respect. But I guess when I was thinking about this question, and I really kept thinking about respect, and I kept thinking when I would say the word in my head, it felt good. And I thought, well, why is this so hard? Why, there is a problem of a respect deficit in some sub-communities between evangelicals and Muslims. So I was looking more at, well, what are some of the first barriers we've got to start breaking down? But point well taken, and we need to break down those barriers with an eye always towards love, and love being central.
Thomas à Kempis, a Christian who lived a rather solitary life, in his book, The Imitation of Christ, has a phrase, "Every time I go out among men, I come back less a man." I often, when I speak, say, every time I go out among believers, I come back less a believer. And part of that is because, particularly if you've been around for a while and dealt with believers for decades, you begin after a while to kind of think, what is it about people before they even become believers, just as human beings, let alone when they then have the layer of belief, which is supposed to somehow, within each belief system, make one more open, more supposedly compassionate, etc. But part of it is that one has a sense that historically the notions of love and compassion have been understood in terms of one's own community. And so when we say love of God and love of neighbor, again, it's my God, my neighbor, and I'm not going to, there's no sharing of my God. and no sharing of my neighbor. That may be putting it simplistically, but I think that it's there. I would leave you with this to think about in terms of what we've been discussing on respect. The next time you read a column in a newspaper that is very negative about Islam and Muslims, or you see Glenn Beck on CNN or some of the others, block out the word Islam and put in Judaism and Jewish, and tell me whether or not an editor would ever say that. Or put in African American, black, etc. I think that if we're talking about respect, in terms of even what we tolerate, both culturally and even legally today, we've got some serious issues. That's not to say, and I want to emphasize this, that Muslims don't have a problem with respect, and that problem does not get expressed within our own society or overseas. But I think that's the challenge to both sides. Thank you very much. Particularly thank you to the panelists. We have a brief coffee break, and we're back here at 11. Thank you.